Welcome to a really interesting bit of the day, because I'm going to introduce you to some amazing companies and the guys who lead them. They are FiReStarters, and they are companies changing the world for the better. And I can tell you some of these ideas are jaw-dropping. I've been talking to them. So first of all, I'm going to give about 5 minutes to each of them to tell us what their company is about. That's probably the easiest thing to do. I'm going to start off with Dom Pickering, who is the Chief Executive Officer of OneOcean. Dom.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm with OneOcean. We're based out of Seattle, Washington. We're a cloud services and analytics company focused on ocean data, which is very unique. We were actually funded by a couple companies in the industry that own ships and do surveying that realized that the industry was very backwards. People are FedExing hard drives as a standard to move data. There's no SaaS functionality in any of the processing softwares. And this data is very expensive to collect. You can only do it with ships and submarines. There's about $3 billion a year spent to collect ocean map data. But that data supports and drives trillions of dollars of industry. So the industries that demand or use this information include oil and gas, telecommunications, pipeline, renewable energy, to optimize the placement for offshore renewable energy. In the construction, they need this data. Fisheries, science, and given the cost of mapping, it's about $50,000 to $75,000 a day to run a ship. This data is really not very accessible to people. And so there's making that data more accessible and being able to use that data more than once, I think, is a value to a lot of people. So it's funny, it sort of clicked with me what Mark meant about integration and the power of integration. I think what we're doing is integrating the internet world in terms of, which is my background, which is cloud, big data, SaaS, and accessibility, with the open source GIS and geospatial world, a lot of which the talent in that environment is focused on land-based problems. Turns out there's more money in helping you find a Starbucks than there is in finding what's on the bottom of the ocean. I'm speaking sort of a little sarcastically there, but we have 100% data on land, but we've only mapped 3% of the ocean floor in high resolution. So we have full maps, high resolution maps of Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Moon, and yet we really fundamentally know very little about the ocean, or inner space as people call it. And really as people are sort of increasingly using resources on land, and those are becoming exhausted, they're turning to the ocean. So, effective, not only use and sort of access to those resources, but effective management of the industries and the governments that set policies and regulate sort of the use of that is important too. So just a couple examples of what we're working on and how this data can help. You have everything from tsunami hazard assessment, where you have applied mathematicians that have built sophisticated models that use digital elevation maps of the seafloor to predict if an earthquake kicks off in a given area, where that wave will hit. Well, the problem is they don't have the map data. So living in Seattle and having read Cascadia's Fault, I've become a little nervous about sort of our tsunami risk in the Pacific Northwest, and realize that there are people with this data that would be interested in potentially sharing it in a controlled fashion, i.e. the US Navy, but they don't have the actual capability of sharing that data or any sort of systems for staging that. So we're interested in increasing the accessibility and ultimately the utility that people have of this data, and doing that both for industry as well as for government. And it's an amazing project. It's something that to really attach myself to a mission and be able to dedicate myself to something as important as the ocean and the welfare of the oceans really is an exciting thing to be part of.
Dom Pickering from OneOcean, thanks very much. Stay with us. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Dan Simon, who is the President and CEO of Heliae Technology Holdings. Is that right, Dan?
That's
Did
correct.
I pronounce it right?
You have it.
Tell us about it.
Some people say hell yes, but Heliae is the proper pronunciation. Thank you for a moment here. Our company was started in 2008. We're an algae technology company. Our goal is to basically be a part of every algae production facility as the industry scales over the next 10 to 15 years. We were started by a partnership of Science Foundation of Arizona, and Bill Harris, I believe, is in the right here up front, as well as Don Budinger. And in addition, a partnership with the members of the Mars family of Mars Incorporated. It's a large 30 billion plus year integrated food company that's privately owned. And back in 2006, they are a privately owned company, a 100-year-old company, and they do 25-year look-aheads and 100-year look-aheads. Being a private company, unlike a public company, they ask big questions and try to respond to them in long-term aspects. So the drivers to setting up the company as an algae technology company was answering 4 key questions. In 25 years, what do we do to feed 9 billion people? Because that's where we'll be. The second question is, how do you diminish the amount of CO2 we emit into the atmosphere? Third question, how do you manage water resources between people and industry? And how do you do this by not diminishing economic expansion on a sustainable basis, if you all buy into the fact that we are in an unsustainable expansion right now? They did this, and as they analyzed it for 2 years, they looked at hundreds of different technologies and arrived at algae, similar to how, if you all listened to Craig Ventnor's discussion last night, it's been around for millions of years and just hasn't been able to be utilized. And drivers to that are simply that the technology to scale it up commercially have been unavailable until recently. So where Craig's working on the synthetic biology associated with developing strains that have characteristics that grow algae, we're focused on the development of the platform upon which that algae grows. We've invested $35 million so far over the last 4 years into developing a commercially viable technology platform right there in Phoenix, Arizona. We see algae as providing anything from a service related to water wastewater remediation, utilizing algae as a filtration unit. You take the integration approach that Mark talked about last night, and you basically take an algae as a food for waste streams. It basically collects waste streams, phosphorus, CO2, and nitrates, and you create products out of it. As well, you can make hundreds of different kinds of products from algae, whether they be feed, food, fertilizer, cosmetics, pharmaceutical, nutraceuticals, fuels, and bio-based chemicals. So our target is products and services related to algae. Today we have 73 people. We have just announced that we'll be building a commercial facility of 20 acres over the next 18 months in Phoenix, Arizona. We've also announced that we have an investment from a large Asian integrated food company. That company is called the Salim Group, and we will be building a facility in Australia, Indonesia, somewhere in Southeast Asia or that area. This is a global platform company. You have to be able to show that you can do this. So our phase 1 is to actually build some facilities and long-term provide the technology and the platforms to grow algae commercially viably in the future in many other places around the world. And that's kind of our short story.
Dan Simon, thanks very much from Heliae Technology Holdings. Okay, David Sarna is the Chief Executive Officer of WoodallTech. David, you're going to talk to us about hydrogen.
I can. I'd like first to say 2 words about myself and to give a shout out to Bill Janeway, who's, I think, sitting here. I'm blinded by the Klieg lights. I've been developing companies for many years. My first company I successfully sold to Computer Associates. I was then funded by Bill Janeway's company, and he did me 2 favors. He funded me, and then he fired me a couple of years later. And that was really a very valuable lesson. I met only a year ago Professor Jerry Woodall. Jerry is a very distinguished person. He was distinguished professor at Purdue for many years, an IBM fellow, and recently he's relocated to the University of California at Davis. And Jerry, frankly, just blew me away. He has got a solution to making the hydrogen economy viable. And he does it in a way which is economical, practical, end-to-end, clean, and I truly believe that it will change the world. It is the most exciting thing that I have ever done in my life. I've been working at it now 6 days a week, 16 hours a day, and I enjoy every minute of it because we are, I think, going to change the world. Jerry's technology is based on a very simple thing, causing water, which of course is made of hydrogen and oxygen, to split. That sounds like a simple thing to do. People have been trying to do it for an awful long time unsuccessfully. And Jerry figured out how to do it in a way that doesn't use any electricity, which is safe, low pressure, and natural, and which uses some catalysts and reacts aluminum with water. And by reacting the aluminum with the water, 1 gram of aluminum will make, together with 2 grams of water, it will make a liter of hydrogen. And of course, what ends up doing is we're causing the hydrogen to separate from the oxygen. The oxygen binds with the aluminum to form aluminum hydroxide. And if you add a little bit of heat to aluminum hydroxide, you will end up with aluminum oxide. And we originally thought this was a big problem, and we used to call it sludge. And then we figured out that the aluminum hydroxide is at least as valuable as the hydrogen. The hydrogen that we make is ultra-pure hydrogen. It was recently tested by Professor Kramer at Calumet, who's the world authority, and it's 99.9993% pure. The 7 parts per million that are not pure are actually carbon dioxide, which is quite easily removed. That's a big deal because, for example, aside from all the things that you've read about to power hydrogen vehicles and everything else, the semiconductor industry exists because enormous amounts of hydrogen are pumped in to the fabs to drive out all the impurities, because otherwise you couldn't make the kinds of small semiconductors that we use today. So every day I discover more and more ways of things that you can do. Bottled hydrogen, not counting futures like vehicles, is a $150 billion market today, which is okay for a startup to go after. And what we have is pretty exciting because hydrogen's big problems are storage, safety. Everybody remembers the Hindenburg. And what we are doing is we are making it on demand, right where you need it, cleanly, safely, and totally recyclably.
David Sarna, CEO of WoodallTech, thank you very much. Next, we've got Kian Saneii, who is the founder and CEO of Independa. Kian, tell us about your big idea.
Well, the big idea is something that I'm sure we're all familiar with. How many in this room actually are either caregivers of an elderly person or know someone close to you who's taking care of someone who is older? Show of hands. That's about maybe 75, 80%. So the global phenomena that's happening is there's a tsunami of the elderly in the US, but also really around the planet. Florida is the rest of us on fast forward. Japan makes Florida look like a middle school. It's happening in Europe. And when we talk about integration, I'm thrilled to be back here. I was here 7 years ago in FiRe as an attendee. And when Mark and I spoke, it was pretty clear that the theme of integration plays a huge role in taking care of the elderly. So when you get older, you want to be where you are. You don't want to go to the next stage of care. which typically takes a lot more anguish and cost, and everyone wants to stay in their home. And when you think about it, the brand and the state of technology today, as it applies to the elderly, is I've fallen and I can't get up. So our mission as Independa was, how come we haven't created a solution 30 years into it that's much better than a pendant that screams, I need support, that nobody wants to wear? So with the help of the design firm IDEO, we set out on a mission to see what's missing from the right solution and why hasn't there been better solutions out there. And really the key came back to be it has to be integrated. So what Independa does, it helps the elderly stay at their residence longer, safer, more comfortably through an integration through multiple aspects of independence. That includes health and safety, that includes social engagement. We integrate with the standard telephone, which is a tool everyone around the planet knows how to use. We integrate with the tablet, so without any kind of computer knowledge, you have a point-and-click opportunity to have not just a video chat with your grandchild, but also look at the web in a categorized way, go through fun and games, but also maintain your health information and look at your daily med schedule, your calendar events that somebody else is setting up for you. Very importantly, we keep health data in a passive way, so if you step on a scale or you do your blood pressure, as well as activity and sensor data around you. So these are very important things for the elderly in order to stay independent. So it's just as important to be able to tell if someone's out of bed 4 hours late, maybe something isn't quite right, then maybe their blood pressure has gone up a little bit. So bringing this back in terms of, that's the integrated view. LG has invested in us as well, so our app is running, it's a cloud-based application, so we have integrated cloud care, but we also run integrated in LG TVs for senior living facilities. So think of us just like LG plus LodgeNet essentially owns around the globe the hospitality market. LG plus Independa will do the same on the senior living front. But back to integration, when we talk about our healthcare issues in this country, 17% of our GDP is healthcare, going to 23%. And a huge portion of that is for the elderly. 75% of our costs are for chronic disease management. A huge portion of that, again, is for the elderly. And comorbidity, which is having more than one chronic condition. Last year of life is typically 50% of cost. So in the US in particular, but globally, unless you manage this challenge for the elderly to be where they are as long as possible without going back and forth into the healthcare system. And the only way you can do that is with the continuity of care, not the episodic care. Unless you do that, you really have major challenges economically and practically. And in the meantime, apart from doing well, there's a huge amount of good that gets done with families and friends and the social circle around someone in the final years of life where you can actually help them be where they want to be and, in fact, have fun in life versus be alone and isolated. So that's what we do. We've gone through our seed funding, and we're now at an equity investment time with VCs and private individuals.
Kian, thanks very much. Kian Saneii, founder and CEO of Independa. Okay, John Vadino, founder and CEO of One to the World. Over to you.
Thank you. How many of you have donated dollars to a brick and mortar school in the last 5 years so they can build more classrooms? So about 60% of the audience. Right now in our system, we're going to send a poll in One to the World, which this is being webcast, and we'll ask the online audience that same question. If we had allowed you the technology we built, you could right now SMS text in your answer and we'd be able to see it on stage, but we didn't want to show PowerPoints and all. What we built is a system where you can webcast your event, webcast your training, and I'll talk about education here in a second, and have an interactive time with your audience. And that interactivity continues both live and on demand. Eric was talking in one of the last sessions about bringing the social networks of Facebook and Twitter, et cetera, into interactive meeting. What we built is something inside of our tool so those corporations, those enterprises that use our product control that information. Once that information's out on Twitter, et cetera, it's kind of in a different world. We try and contain it within our system. We're on the Amazon cloud and AWS, so we can scale immeasurably. And we started this about 5 years ago when I did the 787 first flight. And it had 1,989,000 viewers in 24 minutes came on live to watch this 12-minute takeoff of this airplane. Pretty amazing. We used social networks at the time to build an online audience because we only had 16 hours notice because they weren't sure it was actually going to take off on the morning it was supposed to take off. So we used social network tools to build an audience to come and view our webcast. And I became enamored with education. I have a daughter who just started college. Thank God she got a portion of scholarship. I studied learning, and in our tool, we built it for both oral and visual learners. There's 2 screens, a video screen and a secondary screen, which can be video or PowerPoint, et cetera, so that you're actually, if you're an oral learner, you can focus on what the person's saying. If you're a visual learner, you can focus more on the content. I believe that we need to change the way we educate people in this country. There was a study last year in 2011 in Georgetown University that said in the next 5 years, we need to double the number of students in higher education. Right now there's 20 million. So in 5 years, we got to get to 40 million to feed our economy. How do we do that? Do you want to continue to donate dollars to bricks and mortar for classrooms, 800-person, let's say, classrooms, or should we be donating those for labs? I think a lot of folks know about the Khan Academy, which is online on YouTube, which has math courses for K to 12 age kids. They now have 3,000 videos that you can watch for free that teach you rudimentary math. You look at Virginia Tech, which years ago, this is about 10 years ago, bought a decrepit department store, 60,000 square foot department store. They put 537 computers in it, and all of their remedial math to try and get kids up to math that they need in college happens online, no professor, looking at a screen, and if you have a problem, you turn a little red cup over on your CPU, and assistants in this old department store come and help you. We need to take education online. There's a really smart man that wrote a book called Getting Smart, Tom Vander Ark, who was a superintendent of schools up in Snohomish County, Washington, and then went to the Gates Foundation and spent a good amount of their money trying to redesign high schools. He eventually called it a failure and went to digital learning. I'm going to close with that if we can find a way to empower our students, and I look at my kids who are learning more about their Xbox game online through discovery and research, which is what we want kids to do in school, so that they can get to the next level in that game. If we can bring half of our classes online, we don't need to build more bricks and mortar to have class. We can build bricks and mortar for those labs and that interaction. Lastly, there was a slide last night, Mr. Venter, of 7 billion people on this planet. 1 billion of those are in India. 500 million, 540 million people in India are under the age of 25, and they need to be educated. We're not going to do that in bricks and mortar. We're going to do that online. And that's a tool that we've built and others are building today. Thanks, Liz.
That's an exciting idea to end on, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to say thank you to Dom Pickering of OneOcean, to Dan Simon of Heliae Technology Holdings, to David Sarna of WoodallTech, to Kian Saneii of Independa, and John Vadino of One to the World. Thanks ever so much for all of you. Please show your appreciation.